I watched with satisfaction as two trucks pulled up to my house, the hum of their engines marking the beginning of something I had waited for with cold, calculated anticipation. My cheating wife, Jessica, and her affair partner were upstairs, probably thinking they had more time to finish their twisted little fun. They didn't expect this. No one ever expects the tables to turn this hard. As the movers stepped out of the trucks and started walking toward the house, I lit a cigarette, leaning back on the porch railing, keeping my cool. The breeze carried the smell of fresh pine from the yard, but the scent did nothing to ease the storm brewing in my chest. If anything, it fueled the fire I'd been holding back for too long. I had known for months. It started with the little things, Jessica's constant texting, the way she suddenly became obsessed with her appearance, and the late nights out with the girls. But I wasn't a fool. I know what a liar looks like when they're trying too hard to cover their tracks. I followed her once, saw her climb into some guy's car, laughing like she hadn't a care in the world. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place so fast it made my head spin. After that, I did my homework. Hired a private investigator. I had pictures, timestamps, even video clips of their little trysts. They weren't just fooling around, they were rubbing it in my face, treating me like some oblivious idiot. The movers reached the door just as the sheriff's car pulled up. I had planned this all down to the minute. I flicked my cigarette to the ground, crushing it under my boot with a finality that mirrored how I felt. The door opened, and one of the movers gave me a quick nod. I nodded back, signaling them to go inside. Meanwhile, Jessica and her boy toy were probably still under the covers, thinking the world was on hold for their disgusting affair. The sound of footsteps downstairs wouldn't reach them until it was too late. I could only imagine their faces when the bedroom door would fly open, and instead of seeing me ready for another pointless argument, they'd see my backup plan, removal trucks and a uniformed sheriff about to kick them out of the very house they had defiled. I grinned as I watched them rush downstairs, half-dressed, panic smeared across their faces. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw the movers already carting away the furniture, our furniture, the stuff I'd paid for, the things that had made this house a home. Her lover, some loser named Ryan, stood there like a deer caught in the headlights, unsure of whether to run or pretend this was some kind of joke. The sheriff, a burly man with a grim expression, stepped forward, speaking calmly but firmly. "Ma'am," he said, "this house has been sold. You have 2 hours to vacate or I'll have to remove you by force." Jessica turned to me, her face pale, trying to summon whatever manipulative charm she usually used to weasel out of trouble. "Tom, what's going on? You're not serious, right?" Her voice wavered, her panic barely hidden behind that fake innocence she was so good at. But I wasn't having any of it. "Serious as a heart attack, Jess," I replied coldly. "You and your boy toy better start packing your things. This house? It's no longer yours." Ryan, the idiot, had the nerve to speak up. "Man, this is crazy. You can't do this. We'll be out in an hour, just chill." I stepped toward him, my gaze drilling into his. "You should be grateful I'm not doing more than this, Ryan. You've got an hour. Maybe less if I feel like it." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I wasn't angry, not anymore. The anger had burned out, replaced by a kind of cold satisfaction. This was just the start of what they both deserved. For months, I had been the fool, but not anymore. Now, I was the one in control. Jessica stammered something, but I had already turned my back on them, walking toward my car. I had better things to do than stand there listening to her pathetic excuses. The sound of the movers loading up the truck was all I needed to hear. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. I could hear Jessica scrambling behind me, her footsteps loud on the hardwood floors we had once picked out together. Funny, how little those things mattered now. Everything we had built, everything that was supposed to mean something, it all felt like a lie, like a bad joke, and I was the last one to get the punchline. Tom. Tom, wait. Her voice had that shrill, desperate tone I'd heard before, usually when she was trying to talk her way out of trouble. She had no idea what kind of trouble she was really in this time. I stopped just before opening my car door, turning to face her. She stood there in the doorway, barefoot, wearing nothing but a robe she probably grabbed in a rush. Her hair was a mess, her face flushed, definitely not the look of a woman who'd just woken up from an innocent nap. Behind her, Ryan was lingering like a lost puppy, still shirtless, trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do. If I didn't hate him so much, I might have felt sorry for the guy. Tom, please, we can talk about this. What's going on? Jessica pleaded, taking a few steps toward me. You can't just sell the house without telling me. This is our home. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that felt like it cut right through the tension in the air. Our home? I repeated, shaking my head. Jess, this stopped being our home the minute you started bringing him into it. You made your bed, literally, and now you can lie in it. Just not in my house. Her eyes widened, but it wasn't shock. No, Jessica was far too clever for that. She knew she had messed up, she just didn't think I'd ever find out, let alone do something about it. She always underestimated me, thinking I was too blind or too weak to stand up for myself. Well, today was the day she learned how wrong she was. Tom, I'm sorry, okay? It was a mistake. I was confused, I didn't know what I was doing. She trailed off, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. I knew this script. I'd seen her use it before, when she wanted something, anything, from me. But this time, I wasn't buying it. A mistake? I echoed, keeping my voice steady. Sleeping with some random guy for months isn't a mistake, Jess. It's a choice. And you made it, over and over again. Ryan shifted uncomfortably behind her, but didn't say a word. Smart move on his part, if he knew what was good for him, he'd stay out of it. But Jessica wasn't going to let him off that easy. She turned, looking at him with a mixture of frustration and desperation. Ryan, help me out here. Tell him it wasn't like that. Ryan, however, was not nearly as confident as he had probably been just an hour ago, when everything was going his way. He glanced at me, then back at Jessica, clearly not wanting to get involved in this mess any more than he already was. Jess, maybe we should just go. I don't think. You don't think? Jessica snapped, cutting him off. Her true colors were showing now, the mask slipping as her anger flared. You've been all talk for months, and now you're just going to leave me here to deal with this? I leaned against my car, watching the scene unfold with a kind of detached amusement. If this wasn't my life falling apart in real time, it might have been entertaining. Jessica was unraveling, and it was clear that whatever fantasy she and Ryan had cooked up about their future was falling apart at the seams. Don't worry, Jess, I said, interrupting their spat. You won't be dealing with it for long. Like the sheriff said, you've got 2 hours to pack up and leave. You're out of time. Her face twisted with rage, and for a second, I thought she might actually try to hit me. But she didn't. Instead, she turned her anger back on Ryan, who was backing away like a guy who suddenly realized he was in over his head. You coward, she spat at him. You said you loved me, that we'd figure this out together. Ryan, looking more and more like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, mumbled something about not signing up for this and hurried out the door, leaving Jessica standing there, abandoned by the very man she had betrayed me for. It was almost poetic. I pushed myself off the car and walked back toward the house, stopping just inches from her. You know, I said, my voice low, I used to wonder if it was something I did. If maybe I wasn't enough for you. But now? Now I see it wasn't about me. It was about you, Jess. You're just a selfish, lying bitch who can't stand not getting what she wants. Her face contorted, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked inside, past the movers, who were almost done emptying out the place. This house, these memories, they didn't belong to her anymore. They were mine. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally taking them back. I walked inside, leaving Jessica standing in the doorway, probably trying to figure out how the hell her world had crumbled so fast. I could hear her shouting something behind me, but it was just noise at this point. I had moved past caring. The movers were efficient, just as I had instructed. They knew what they were doing, loading everything of mine into the trucks with swift precision. The things that mattered to me were packed away, while the rest of the furniture, the shared memories, and all the stuff I didn't give a damn about anymore, stayed behind. They were part of the past, a past I was ready to burn down. As I moved through the now empty living room, I felt a strange sense of relief. There had been so many nights where I sat in this very room, wondering what had gone wrong, where things had changed between Jessica and me. Turns out, the problem wasn't that I wasn't good enough, it was that she was never satisfied. That knowledge had been like a knife to the gut at first, but now it felt more like a clean cut, sharp, painful, but one I could heal from. The sheriff walked in, looking around at the half-empty house. He gave me a nod, acknowledging that things were progressing as they should. I'd paid off every mortgage bill, signed the papers, and made sure everything was legal and airtight. Jessica had no idea. She probably still believed she had control, that I'd never take this step. "You all right?" he asked, his voice calm but professional. I gave him a nod. "Better than I've been in months." "Good. Once the movers are done, she's got about an hour left to get out. If she tries anything, just let me know." I didn't think she'd try anything dramatic, but with Jessica, you could never be too sure. She was a master of manipulation, twisting situations in her favor until they were unrecognizable. But today, no amount of lies or crocodile tears could save her. The sheriff walked back out to his car, leaving me alone with my thoughts again. I could hear Jessica yelling at the movers from outside, her voice rising and falling in the same pattern it always did when she didn't get what she wanted. First came the anger, then the pleading, then the victim routine. She was probably telling them how this was all a misunderstanding, how I was being irrational, hoping that maybe someone would take her side. But no one was going to save her this time. Not Ryan, who had vanished like a ghost. Not the movers, who couldn't care less about her personal drama. And certainly not me. I made my way upstairs to what used to be our bedroom. It felt different now, stripped bare, like a hollow shell of what it once was. The bed was gone, the closet doors swung open, empty hangers clinking together in the breeze from the window. This was where it had all happened, where Jessica and her lover had shared their stolen moments, thinking I would never find out. The rage that had been simmering just below the surface began to bubble up again, but I pushed it down. I didn't want to give her that power over me anymore. Instead, I walked over to the nightstand and pulled out the drawer. There, tucked under some old receipts and forgotten papers, was the little black notebook I had found months ago. The one where Jessica had carelessly written down dates and times, scribbling love notes to Ryan like a teenager. I hadn't been looking for it when I found it, but once I did, everything started to make sense. Flipping through the pages, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The things she had written, her thoughts, her feelings about him, about us, were like little needles stabbing into the last bits of my trust. She'd mocked me in her writing, calling me boring, predictable. She had called Ryan exciting, spontaneous, everything she thought she wanted in a man. I closed the notebook, tossing it into the trash. That was where it belonged, with all the other garbage she had brought into my life. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Jessica standing in the doorway, her face red with frustration. "You're really doing this, huh? You're just going to throw everything away, like it meant nothing?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. No, Jess. You threw everything away the moment you started sleeping with him. I'm just cleaning up the mess you left behind. She scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. It wasn't just about that, Tom. We weren't happy, and you know it. You were never around, always working, always distracted. I needed more. I deserved more. There it was, her favorite excuse. Somehow, she always managed to twist it around so that she was the victim, the one who had been wronged. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Don't give me that bullshit, Jess. You could have talked to me. We could have worked on things. But instead, you decided to screw around behind my back and treat me like a fool. So no, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just done being your safety net. Her lips trembled as she tried to come up with another excuse, but the look in her eyes told me she knew it was over. Really over. I wasn't playing her game anymore. Tom, please, she whispered, her tone suddenly soft. We can still fix this. I'll make it right. I'll end things with Ryan, and we can start over. I stared at her for a moment, wondering how many times she had said something like this to herself, convincing herself that she could have it all without any consequences. But I had made my decision. No, Jess. There's no fixing this. We're done. Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in her eyes. The reality of the situation was sinking in. She wasn't in control anymore. Without another word, I walked past her, leaving her standing in the empty room that used to be ours. The sound of the movers downstairs filled the silence, and I didn't look back. I headed downstairs, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a life I had invested everything in, believing it would last. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the movers finishing up. They were efficient, professional, packing the last of my things into the truck without so much as a glance in Jessica's direction. I stepped out onto the porch, needing the fresh air to clear my head. The house behind me felt like a tomb, holding only the ghosts of what we had once been. Jessica was still upstairs, probably sitting in that empty room, trying to figure out her next move. But for the first time, I didn't care what her next move was. She was no longer my problem. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. She had about 45 minutes left before the sheriff would enforce the eviction. She could stay there, stew in her own mess, or pack up whatever was left and walk out with whatever dignity she still thought she had. The movers finished loading the last box and gave me a nod before climbing into their trucks. I didn't need to give them any more instructions, they knew the drill. It had all been planned. I had taken my time with this, making sure everything was perfect. I watched with satisfaction as the trucks pulled away, heading toward the storage facility where my things would be kept until I figured out my next steps. As I lit another cigarette, I saw the sheriff approach, his expression still calm and businesslike. He didn't seem fazed by the drama, probably used to seeing this kind of thing more often than I could imagine. "You good?" he asked, stopping beside me. I took a drag of the cigarette and nodded. "Yeah. Just waiting for the clock to run out." He glanced back at the house, then looked at me again. "She's not coming out without a fight, is she?" I shrugged. "She'll come out. She knows this is done. She just needs time to figure out what that means." He nodded, understanding. "Well, you've got time. But once it hits, I'll have to move her out if she doesn't go willingly." I knew the sheriff was just doing his job, but the thought of seeing Jessica being physically dragged out of the house wasn't something I wanted. No matter how much she had betrayed me, we had shared a life together once. I wasn't cruel. I wanted her to leave, but I didn't want to see her humiliated like that. The minutes passed slowly as I stood there, watching the house, the cigarette burning down between my fingers. The memories of how things used to be flashed in my mind, our first day moving in, painting the walls, picking out furniture, and all the little moments that were supposed to build a future. But those moments didn't matter anymore. They were just a backdrop to a lie I hadn't seen coming. I heard the front door creak open, and Jessica finally emerged. She looked different now, defeated, broken, no longer the confident woman who had been so sure of herself just hours ago. Her suitcase dragged behind her, the wheels scraping against the pavement as she walked slowly toward me. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, and her hands trembled as she gripped the suitcase handle. For a moment, she stopped in front of me, looking up with an expression that was a mix of desperation and sorrow. "Tom, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But can't we at least try to talk this out?" There it was again, that final attempt to pull me back in, to make me doubt my decision. But I was past the point of negotiation. There was no saving what she had shattered. I met her eyes, my voice steady. "There's nothing left to talk about, Jess. It's over." She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it, realizing that nothing she could say would change my mind. Slowly, she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I didn't flinch. Jessica turned, walking down the driveway toward her car. I watched her go, the suitcase bouncing along behind her, and felt a strange sense of finality. This was it, the last chapter of a story that should have ended a long time ago. As she climbed into her car, I couldn't help but feel that this moment had been inevitable. Her car started, the engine rumbling softly as she sat there for a few seconds, probably still processing the fact that her life had just changed forever. I could see her gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She was trying to hold on, but there was nothing left to hold on to. With one last glance in the rearview mirror, she drove off, disappearing down the street, leaving me standing there on the porch. The sheriff walked over again, watching her car fade into the distance. "Well, that's that," he said, his tone flat. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "That's that." He gave me a final nod and headed back to his car, leaving me alone with the empty house and the fading smell of cigarettes and betrayal. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle in around me. It felt heavy but also freeing. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next lie, the next excuse. It was all out in the open now, and there was nothing left to hide. I walked back into the house, the echo of my footsteps filling the empty space. The movers had taken everything that mattered to me, and the rest? It wasn't my problem anymore. I moved through the house one last time, taking in the emptiness, and with each step, I felt lighter, like I was shedding the weight of everything that had come before. When I reached the front door, I turned back one last time. The house, once filled with memories, now felt like a stranger's place, cold, distant, and unrecognizable. It wasn't mine anymore. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and walked toward my car. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. The drive away from the house was surreal. For years, that place had been my anchor, home. But now, it felt like I was finally cutting the ties that had been holding me down, driving away from the wreckage of a life that wasn't mine anymore. As I drove, my mind played over the events of the past few hours, trying to make sense of how things had spiraled so quickly, yet so perfectly. The satisfaction of watching Jessica leave with her tail between her legs lingered, but the deeper emotions began to settle in, the ones I had been pushing down for so long. Anger, hurt, confusion. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about everything we had built that had been tossed aside like garbage. I glanced at my phone, tempted to call someone, anyone, just to get the weight off my chest. But I wasn't sure who to call. My family had always been skeptical of Jessica, but I had defended her. My friends had their own lives, and the last thing I wanted was to show up with this mess hanging over my head. In a way, I felt alone. Not physically, I had people I could lean on, but emotionally. It was like the foundation I had trusted for so long had crumbled beneath me, and I was just now realizing it. The road stretched out in front of me, and I found myself driving aimlessly, no destination in mind. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to rush home or check in with anyone. There was no Jessica waiting for me, no excuses to swallow, no lies to decipher. Just me and the open road. Eventually, I pulled over at a park by the lake, one I used to go to as a kid. I hadn't been there in years, but the place still had that same quiet charm. I sat on a bench by the water, staring out at the ripples as the wind blew gently across the surface. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. As I sat there, the memories came flooding back. I thought about how Jessica and I used to come to places like this when we first started dating. Back then, things were simple. We'd sit for hours, talking about life, our dreams, the future. Everything seemed so clear, so full of potential. I was sure she was the one. I believed every word she said, trusted her with everything I had. But looking back now, I realized how blind I had been. The little lies, the excuses, they had started long before Ryan came into the picture. They had always been there, like cracks in the foundation, but I had chosen to ignore them. I had convinced myself that no relationship was perfect, that everyone had flaws. But I was wrong. This wasn't about imperfections, it was about betrayal, pure and simple. I pulled my phone out again, scrolling through the contacts. My thumb hovered over my best friend Nick's name. He had been there through everything, always the one to tell me to trust my gut. And my gut had screamed at me for months that something was off with Jessica. I had just been too scared to admit it. I hit call, and after a couple of rings, Nick answered. "Tom? Hey man, what's up?" His voice was casual, like we hadn't spoken about this disaster in ages. I guess he had no idea what was going on. "Nick," I began, unsure how to even start. "I did it. I ended it. It's over." There was a pause on the other end, and then Nick let out a slow whistle. "You serious? What happened?" I filled him in, telling him everything, from the affair, to the eviction, to the moment I watched Jessica drive off for good. The more I talked, the more it felt real. Saying it out loud made the weight of it heavier, but also clearer, like I was finally able to process what had happened. "Damn, man," Nick said when I finished. "I don't even know what to say. I knew things were bad, but I didn't think it'd get to this point. You holding up all right?" I leaned back on the bench, watching the sun dip lower over the lake. "I'm fine, I guess. I don't know. It's weird. I thought I'd feel more broken, you know? But honestly, I just feel relieved. Like I've been carrying this load for so long and now it's just gone." Nick was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's because you already grieved this relationship a long time ago. You just didn't let yourself admit it until now. Trust me, I've seen it in you for months. You knew it was over, you just weren't ready to let it go." I thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe, deep down, I had already accepted that our marriage had been dying for a long time. I had just been too stubborn, or maybe too afraid, to end it. I wanted to believe that things could change, that Jessica would come around, that we'd find our way back to what we used to be. But that was a fantasy. And today, I had finally shattered that illusion. "Yeah," I said after a while. "I think you're right. It's just strange, you know? I never thought it would end like this. Not with trucks, movers, and a sheriff watching her walk out of my life." Nick chuckled softly. "Hey, at least you got some closure. Some people never even get that." Closure. That word hit hard. I guess that's what this was, wasn't it? The final nail in the coffin of our marriage. And even though it hurt, even though it felt like a chapter of my life had been ripped out and thrown away, I knew it was the right thing to do. "You need anything?" Nick asked. "Want me to come by or grab a drink or something?" "Nah," I replied. "Not right now. I think I just need some time to figure things out." "Alright, man. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." I thanked him and hung up, pocketing my phone and leaning forward on the bench, my elbows resting on my knees. The lake was calm, the sky now turning shades of pink and purple as the sun set. I felt a strange kind of peace, like I was finally free from the weight I had been dragging around for so long. As I sat there, I thought about what came next. I hadn't figured that part out yet. Divorce was inevitable, but beyond that? I didn't know. But for the first time, I wasn't scared of the unknown. I wasn't scared of starting over. I was ready. The next few days passed in a blur. The silence in my temporary apartment felt deafening at first, but eventually, I started to get used to it. There was no more tension, no late-night arguments, no pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. It was just me, alone with my thoughts, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like a good thing. I had already set the divorce papers in motion. I wasn't dragging this out any longer than it had to be. Jessica could keep whatever scraps of our life she thought were worth saving, but I was done with all of it. I had moved my things into storage, and was renting this place until I figured out my next steps. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom apartment downtown, but it was mine, and right now, that was all I needed. Nick came by one evening, bringing a six-pack and a pizza, trying to lighten the mood. He hadn't asked for details since our phone call at the lake, and I appreciated that. We didn't need to keep talking about Jessica or what had happened. It was enough that he knew. As we sat on the couch, Nick cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "You look better, man," he said, taking a sip of his own drink. "I mean, considering everything. How's it been?" I shrugged, taking a long gulp of the cold beer. "It's been weird. Quiet. I guess that's what I wanted though." Nick nodded, setting his beer on the coffee table. "Yeah, I get that. But still, this is a lot to go through. You talked to anyone else about it? Family, anyone?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'll get around to it eventually, but I just needed some time to process everything, you know? It's hard enough admitting this to myself. I'm not ready for the pity looks from my family or the 'I told you so' speeches." Nick leaned back, stretching his legs out. "I hear you. But you know your family's got your back, right? They'll support whatever you need." I nodded, knowing he was right. My mom would probably smother me with concern, and my dad, well, he'd offer that tough love that I didn't exactly need right now. But Nick was right, they would support me no matter what. I just wasn't ready to face that yet. We spent the rest of the evening catching up on other things, sports, work, anything but the disaster that had been my marriage. It was nice to talk about something else for a change, to not have every conversation circle back to Jessica and the mess she had made of our lives. For a few hours, it felt like I was normal again, like this massive upheaval wasn't hanging over my head. But as the night wound down, and Nick left, the quiet settled back in, and my thoughts started drifting back to everything that had happened. As much as I tried to distract myself, the reality of the situation still hit hard when I was alone. The apartment was small, the walls too bare, the air too still. This wasn't where I was supposed to be. I should have been at home, in my own bed, next to a wife who loved me. But that version of my life was gone. It had never existed in the first place. Jessica had seen to that. I found myself scrolling through my phone, half out of habit, half out of some stupid hope that maybe she'd text or call, say something to make this all make sense. But there was nothing. Not a single message. She hadn't even bothered to reach out since the day she left the house. I guess that was just confirmation of what I already knew, she didn't care. Not really. I tossed the phone aside and lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. My mind wandered back to that night, the night I found out. The memory of it still burned like acid, the raw disbelief I felt when I saw the texts, the pictures, the videos. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I had picked up her phone to order us dinner. She was in the shower, getting ready for another night out with the girls, and I had no reason to doubt her, until the screen lit up with a message from Ryan. Some cheesy, intimate message about their next time, with a heart emoji. My hands had shaken as I unlocked the phone and scrolled through the months of conversations, the photos, the blatant proof of their affair. I remembered sitting there on the edge of the bed, feeling the ground fall out from under me. My heart pounded, my mind racing through every conversation, every excuse, every late night she had spent working or with friends. The pieces had all fallen into place, and suddenly, the last few months of my life made sense in the worst possible way. When she came out of the bathroom, toweling off her hair, she had that smug smile on her face, the kind she wore when she thought she had everything under control. I couldn't even look at her. I just handed her the phone, opened to her messages with Ryan, and watched as her expression shifted from confidence to shock, then to panic. She had stumbled over her words, trying to explain, trying to minimize it, but there was no minimizing this. I had all the proof in my hands, and her lies couldn't save her this time. That was the moment I knew things were over. Even before the confrontation, before the movers, before the sheriff, I had made the decision right then and there. There was no coming back from what she had done. She had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. I sat up on the couch, rubbing my face with both hands, trying to shake off the memory. It didn't hurt as much now, not in the way it had that first night, but the sting was still there. The betrayal still echoed in the back of my mind, like a wound that hadn't fully healed yet. But I was getting there. Slowly. Day by day, I was piecing myself back together. It wasn't easy, but I was learning to let go of the anger, to accept what had happened and move forward. I wasn't the same person I had been before, and maybe that was a good thing. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. It was time to call my lawyer, time to finalize the papers and make this thing official. No more dragging it out. No more waiting. The day I met with my lawyer, the sky was overcast, a perfect reflection of my mood. I pulled up to the office, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Walking into that building felt like stepping into the final round of a fight I never wanted to be part of. But there was no avoiding it. This was how it had to end. Karen, my lawyer, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s who had seen more than her share of broken marriages. Her office was neat and efficient, just like her. As I sat across from her at her desk, she glanced up at me over her reading glasses, her expression neutral. "Tom, we're almost there," she said, flipping through the papers in front of her. "Just a few final signatures, and this will all be behind you." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of finality. I wasn't sad, not in the way people probably expect when you're ending a marriage. I wasn't mourning anymore. That phase had passed, burned out by anger and betrayal. Now, it was more like exhaustion, like I was just ready for this to be over. Karen slid the papers across the desk, pointing to where I needed to sign. "Once this is filed, you're officially divorced. No going back. You sure about this?" Her question wasn't accusatory. It was just her way of making sure I was ready for the consequences. I appreciated it, even though I knew my answer without hesitation. "Yeah," I said, taking the pen and scrawling my name across the dotted line. "I'm sure." She nodded, pulling the papers back and neatly stacking them. "All right, then. This will take a few days to process, but once it's done, you'll get a copy of the final decree. Everything's been sorted with the house and your assets, so you won't have to worry about Jessica trying to come after anything. Hearing her name felt like a punch to the gut, even now. I hadn't seen her since the day she left the house, hadn't spoken to her, hadn't even checked her social media to see what she was up to. And that had been hard. As much as I hated to admit it, part of me still wanted to know what she was doing, how she was handling things. But the other part of me, the part that was healing, knew that keeping tabs on her would only drag me back into that dark place I was trying to escape. Good, I said, trying to push thoughts of her aside. I just want this done. Karen smiled, but it was a sympathetic smile. She had seen this look before, the look of someone who had been through hell and back. I get it. And I know it probably doesn't feel like it now, but trust me, this is the best decision you could have made. You're better off without her. I nodded, appreciating her support. Karen had been professional through all of this, but she'd also been kind, understanding that I wasn't just another client to push through the system. I was someone whose life had been turned upside down, and she had helped me navigate that chaos. Thanks, I said, standing up to leave. I appreciate everything you've done. Karen stood too, offering her hand. Anytime, Tom. And if you ever need anything else, you know where to find me. I shook her hand and walked out of the office, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, it was all there, swirling together like a storm that had yet to fully clear. But beneath it all, there was also a sense of hope, a small spark of something new that hadn't been there before. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. The drive back to my apartment felt different this time. The sky was still gray, but I noticed the light breaking through the clouds in patches, and for some reason, it felt like a metaphor for my life. I had been living under a dark cloud for months, but now, the light was starting to break through. Slowly, but surely. When I got back to my place, I sat down on the couch and stared at the divorce papers. It was all so final, so official. I had expected to feel more pain, more regret, but all I felt was a deep sense of exhaustion. Maybe that's what closure really feels like, not dramatic or earth-shattering, just a quiet acceptance that things are over. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts again. This time, I wasn't looking for Jessica or a lawyer. I was looking for my brother, Mike. We hadn't spoken much since everything went down. Not because he didn't care, but because I hadn't been ready to talk about it. But now, I felt like I needed family. I needed someone who had known me longer than this mess with Jessica. The phone rang a few times before Mike answered. Tommy, man, how's it going? Hearing his voice felt like a warm hug after a long, cold day. Hey, Mike. I'm good. Well, I'm alright. Just signed the divorce papers. There was a brief silence on the other end before he spoke again, softer this time. Damn, bro. That's gotta be tough. How you holding up? I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Better than I thought I would be, honestly. It's weird. I'm sad, I guess, but more than anything, I'm just ready for this to be over. Mike sighed, and I could hear him shifting on the other end. Yeah, I get that. You know, I never liked Jess. I never said anything because, well, you were in love and all, but I always thought she was too cold, man. Too selfish. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I probably should have seen that sooner. Don't beat yourself up about it, Mike said quickly. Love blinds you to a lot of things. But the important thing is you're out now. You're free. Free. That word stuck with me. I hadn't really thought of it like that before, but Mike was right. I was free, free from the lies, from the manipulation, from the constant feeling of being on edge in my own home. I guess I am, I said, a small smile creeping onto my face. It's just weird. I spent so long trying to make this marriage work, and now that it's over, it's like. What now? What do I do with my life? Mike chuckled. Man, you do whatever the hell you want. You don't have to answer to anyone anymore. You can go on trips, meet new people, focus on yourself. You've been putting yourself last for too long. It's time to take care of you. I nodded, realizing how right he was. For years, I had been bending over backward trying to make Jessica happy, trying to keep our marriage together while she was out destroying it. I hadn't even thought about what I wanted in so long that I wasn't sure where to start. You're right, I said, feeling a little more hopeful. I think I needed to hear that. Anytime, bro, Mike replied. And hey, if you need a change of scenery, come stay with us for a bit. The kids would love to see their uncle. I smiled at the thought of spending time with Mike and his family, getting away from everything for a while. I might just take you up on that. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting his words sink in. I was free. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, I had the power to decide where it would lead. The possibilities, for the first time in a long time, felt endless. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling of lightness, as if signing those papers had lifted a weight I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying. There was no Jessica in the bed beside me, no tension gnawing at my gut, no need to wonder where she was or who she was with. It was just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the city wake up. The sky was clear, the sun shining through in a way that felt symbolic, like the universe was telling me it was okay to move on. As I sipped my coffee, my mind wandered back to Mike's words the night before. Do whatever the hell you want. I hadn't thought about what I wanted in so long. My life had been wrapped up in Jessica's needs, her moods, her lies. But now? I had a clean slate. No baggage, no expectations. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. I sat down at the small kitchen table, staring at my phone. For a moment, I considered calling Jessica, just to hear what she'd say now that the divorce was real. But I stopped myself. What was the point? She'd probably try to spin another web of lies, or worse, play the victim. I didn't need to hear it. Her chapter in my life was closed, and I wasn't about to reopen it. Instead, I opened my laptop and started looking at flights. Mike's offer was tempting, but I needed something bigger, something that would remind me I was more than just the guy who got cheated on. I needed to see the world, feel alive again. And as I scrolled through destinations, one caught my eye: Italy. I had always wanted to go to Italy. The culture, the food, the history, it was something I had dreamed about back when I thought Jessica and I would travel together. But she had always been too busy, too wrapped up in her own world to care about mine. So I had put it off, thinking there'd be time later. But now? Now was my time. Without overthinking it, I booked a flight for the following week. Just like that, I had something to look forward to, a new adventure, one that had nothing to do with my past. Over the next few days, I felt a growing sense of excitement. I packed my bags, canceled the lease on my apartment, and arranged for my things in storage to stay put until I got back. I wasn't sure how long I'd be gone, but that was the beauty of it, I didn't have to know. For the first time in years, I didn't have a plan, and that was exactly what I needed. The morning of my flight, I stood at the apartment door, suitcase in hand, and took one last look around. It wasn't much, but it had been my refuge during the storm. Now, I was ready to leave it behind. I locked the door and headed to the airport, feeling like I was stepping into a new life. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I spent most of it gazing out the window, thinking about how far I had come. The pain, the betrayal, it was all still there, lingering in the background. But it didn't control me anymore. Jessica had taken enough from me, and I wasn't about to let her steal my future too. When the plane touched down in Rome, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. The start of something new. As I stepped out into the warm Italian air, I smiled to myself. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't running from something, I was running toward something. The first few days in Italy were a whirlwind. I wandered through the narrow streets of Rome, stood in awe beneath the towering architecture, and ate my weight in pasta and gelato. I met people, shared stories, and started to remember who I was outside of the mess that Jessica had created. I wasn't just a guy who got cheated on. I was more than that, more than I had let myself be in years. One afternoon, as I sat at a cafe in Florence, sipping on an espresso and watching the world go by, I realized something important. I hadn't just lost a wife, I had found myself. The man I had been before all the lies, before all the pain, was still there. And now, he was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. I thought back to the moment I had watched those moving trucks pull up to my house, the cold satisfaction I had felt as Jessica's world crumbled around her. I had wanted revenge back then, wanted her to feel the same kind of pain she had caused me. But sitting here, thousands of miles away from that life, I realized I didn't need revenge. I had something far better. I had peace. As the sun began to set over the Tuscan hills, casting a warm golden light over the city, I raised my glass and toasted to myself. To freedom. To moving on. To finally letting go. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, I was no longer defined by my past. Jessica's betrayal had broken me, but it had also rebuilt me into someone stronger, someone who knew his worth. And that was the greatest revenge of all. In that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years, like a weight I hadn't even noticed was finally lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't looking back anymore. My life, my real life, was just beginning. And for the first time, it was mine. The end.